First of all, let me thank each and every one of you on behalf of HCS for coming all the way. Today we have a very special session and one of the interesting sessions is directly on investment in startups. Yes, even without the mic. Alright, so why are we talking about startups? The last couple of years, as you can see, COVID has resulted into something totally different in Indian economy. We have 32 unicorns for the first ever in the entire decade. We have 32 unicorns with $1 billion valuation, and we have a couple of decacorns also. As you're saying, these are getting into IPOs also. So now this presents an opportunity for the entire financial ecosystem, because as we see thousands of crores of funding coming in, which are a lot more than the listed companies. So we see that a lot of opportunities have opened up, and there is very little information here. So that is the reason why we are starting this session. And most importantly, we have the right persons. I'll read you the profiles, then you'll understand how lucky we are all to have them here. So let me start with Mr. Nayan. Nayan is a chartered accountant, and he has done his law, and he is currently the co-founder of Treta Group. And Nayan has over 10 years of experience in the field of transaction planning, succession planning, due diligence. And he has been an integral part of international taxation and transaction services in EY Hyderabad as a senior manager. And he has a lot of recognitions. He is always recognized as a star performer. And he is also a prominent speaker in IIMs and the institutional bodies of ICA and ICSA. So let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Nayan. And let me introduce the second speaker as well. So we have Ms. Sundari. She is the co-founder and partner of once again, Campus Group. She is the co-founder and partner of Campus Group, and she is a licensed attorney in India, and she has got her graduation degree from Columbia Law School, New York. Experience as a corporate lawyer, and she has handled a lot of clients, both Indian and international, and she advises various companies in verticals such as venture capital, angel funds, international funds, exactly the right profile for what we're looking for. She had worked across industries like biotechnology, pharma, and also infrastructure, and she generally advises clients on domestic and cross-border business ventures, private equity investments, mergers and acquisitions, and she has extensive experience in the corporate law, advising and raising capital, and most importantly, she handles commercial and corporate litigation matters also. She worked with Sydney, Austin, Brown and Wood, a law firm at Manhattan, and she received her master's degree from Columbia University, which is in New York. So a warm welcome to. Now I invite Mr. Nayan to hand over the proceedings. Please, Nayan.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Fine. With the mic or without mic? You can hear my voice over the mic, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Use the mic.
With mic, right? Alright. Good evening, everyone. I know it's a Saturday evening, and we are discussing different sessions around startups and revolution around the industry. So before I get into the deep dive into the details, any thoughts as to what you are expecting from the session? Broadly, what is there anything specific that you want us to cover, or we go with the flow, of course. But yeah, is there anything specific that you want us to cover? More than happy to take those also while I am going to discuss. So any thoughts, anyone?
Investors front.
Valuations? Okay, we'll try covering valuations. Yes, sure.
Type of investment.
Type of investments in startups. Okay, fair enough. Anything else?
And many of them issue of investors who want to invest.
Okay, so different issues with the
Not
investors.
CS.
Right, understand. Anything else? Anything in specific?
What are the precautions to be taken care when you're starting up a company and also taking it forward, because growth always brings in some issues.
Sure. So different issues in terms of how to start up and what not start up, etc. Yeah. Anything else?
Opportunities, various opportunities.
various opportunities for because there are a plethora of startups here, and of course plethora of investors likewise. But yeah, because we'll try and tell you more on the commercial front and regulatory tax front as to broadly on terms of startups. So yes, anything else?
How to approach the investors?
How to approach the investors when you're starting a startup? Fair enough. That we will cover. I think that's definitely a part of our panel discussion. So that will cover. Okay. Just a very broad overview. Okay. Now, startups. It's not that it's a new concept. It was always there, but now the government recognized the fact, and this came out more prominently in the economy from Make in India and related parts. While also the global economy saw a lot of rise in small entities taking it up very big. And then by big I mean huge. You know, we've seen the Flipkarts and different startups, you know, Oyo, etc. Just taking up very high flight. And this is not just a case in India, but also, you know, overseas across. So technically, you know, to incentivize people more on the field of entrepreneurship, the term startup had got framed. And you know, it's a startup that it starts and it goes at a very different pace or a fast pace way to, you know, towards the next steps. Now, let's go few decades back. I start a business. Now, if I have to expand, I have to earn the money. I have to then reinvest, earn, reinvest. Now, this cycle, you know, for me to reach a particular milestone would have taken me 5 years, say 10 years, etc. But what if someone came and told me that, okay, now if you want to start and if you want to scale up, I am ready to invest in you. While you show the faith in me, I also repose that same faith in you by saying that, okay, if you are able to give me funds, then probably what I want to achieve in 10 years, I'll be able to achieve it in 3 years. Now, that fast pace or that increase, and especially to, you know, with any innovative idea or, you know, something which is very different, it is not the straight line method. It's you are moving around in a different way to improvise few things, or, you know, you've discovered a new thing, or you've learned a new way of doing a particular thing. It can be any of those. And when you know that you will be able to achieve what you achieve in 10 years in a span of, let's say, a couple of years, 3-4 years, that's when you will be more than happy to take funds and take investments. And that's where the whole investor startup story has started. And that's where the whole growth story has come. And because of that, because people have started recognizing value in terms of startups, and also the investors have found that this is, okay, another basket of investments that you can have, apart from where you are putting your risk and non-risk elements. They recognize that, okay, if I invest in this, and let's say even if I forget, or even if I give some more time into it, then probably it will grow to the scale that is being visualized. So with all those objectives, you'll find broadly the statistics around how many startups are there, what's the fundraise, etc. Of course, all of this is through sources, which is available on Indian government's website itself. It's called Startup India. And the whole idea that, you know, all of these startups are into innovation, etc., and major portion also being into technology. Government has also realized that, you know, they want to make things easy for startups. That is why if you see, there is a website called Startup India which is being set up. There is also an app for it. And all you have to do if you are a startup is go register, and then via that you have a lot of things that come in, which of course I will discuss a little bit detail, you know, as we move forward. But yeah, you have all those things coming up. So government has also eased up a lot of things for startups, and with that excitement as we talk, the government is also pretty happy to, you know, set up many things. So there is also a fund of funds, which is basically there is a government fund which funds different funds. And those funds are exclusively into startups. They have investments into startups. So startups are also being widely recognized by the government, and they understand that if India is to grow towards Make in India or more move forward on that direction, then startups will play a very key role, because these are the ones that are seeds, and they have the power to grow into a plant. So what is a startup? Okay, now startup is basically, who recognizes startups? Who tells, okay, this is a startup? Like I start my business, I tell I am a startup. You start your business, you tell you are a startup. But government said not every startup is a startup. What is recognized by the government is a different definition of startup. Now how did the government come out with these rules? Who in the government decides all of this? So there is a department called DPIIT, which is Department for Promotion of internal and international trade. Now, when you talk about startups, they say that okay, startups have to satisfy a few things. One is it has to be an entity, it cannot be an individual. An individual can have an idea, but for him to run a business, it needs to be an organized setup. By organized setup, it can be a partnership firm, a limited liability partnership, or a private limited. Make a note, public limited companies are not generally included in this startup thing, because public limited companies are a little further ahead of private limited in terms of closer to listing than private limited. So that is why they don't immediately recognize public limited companies as startups. The second important thing is it should not be more than 10 years, which is basically that seed. It has to be a new startup. It has to have some newness. It cannot be something which is already in place for more than say a decade, and then you tell that okay, I am a startup now, because you've already crossed a stage of startup. As we talked, the turnover, that is your sales or your gross receipts, as we talk, should not exceed 100 crores. Because the moment it exceeds 100 crores, typically it gets into a medium scale industry or a beyond small scale industry. So which is why they have clearly recognized the fact that okay, we want to encourage those people who are starting, who are germinating out there, and not the ones who already germinated. So the entire startup ecosystem works where till the time your turnover doesn't exceed 100 crores. And okay, the turnover is for one particular year. It is not a cumulative factor. That is from starting till, let's say I am 5 years old. From starting till date I must have done 100 crores. But every year is what we will have to see for 100 crores, each financially in Indian context. The third one, which is the most important, is as I told you, I am a startup, you are a startup, everyone is a startup. In first 1, 2, 3, which is all of these three, any new industry will fall. But the key distinguishing factor for a startup is it has to be something innovative, some innovative process, some innovative service, as I was saying, to do a particular thing in a different way, etc. So this is an important criteria, because government wants to see startups which are not competing with each other but are complementary, and they have something to do to give back to the economy, and they'll be only able to give back something where they have some unique idea, where they have some unique thought, which is why almost all startups need to have something different. It cannot be like, for example, I do a trading business. I buy something, I sell something. Even I can do, you can do, everyone can do. But is that a startup? No. But if I am able to improvise on this process, then definitely I can try and apply for a startup. If I satisfy all the 4 conditions, then I make an application to DPIIT. And as I was saying, this application is made via Startup India website, which is a portal, or through an application, Startup India application. So there is an app for it where you go, you register yourself, you give all your business details, and thereafter you make an application to DPIIT. The moment you do an application to DPIIT will see if all the 4 conditions are satisfied, and if it is satisfied, they then immediately release a certificate for you, which is called a Startup Recognition Certificate. Till the time you have that certificate, you are not a startup as per government. You may be startup in your own sense, but not as per government. That's one key important criteria.
Earlier slide.
Yeah.
Yeah. How can we justify the innovative product or services?
So what happens is you basically make a pitch presentation to DPIIT,
Okay.
telling that okay, I am like this. This is what is unique for me. This is my USP, and this USP, to my mind, satisfies that criteria, which is it has something innovative, etc. Now, if you are able to satisfy the government that it is, they will give you a recognition. If, let's say, for example, some reason government doesn't recognize or rejects your application, then thereafter you need to go for grievance or try to make a reapplication for them to understand what you have done. Maybe they must not have understood it in first go. The second, third go, you are given an opportunity. Yeah. So, okay, because I'm a chartered accountant, let me talk about tax first. Okay, then let's talk about the other things that come in. So, for purely startups, okay, one of the reasons which may be beneficial, may not be beneficial, or while you are having conversations with your clients, typically startups have three very, very important exemptions or some differences in terms of taxation. And this is where of course there will be a valuation related conversation, etc. But yeah, broadly 3 important. One is they are given a tax holiday, which means out of every 3 years, consecutive financial years, out of first 10 years, you can take an exemption for whatever income you get. So all the income that you get, you will take it as a deduction under a section called 80IAC. And as per that section, whatever earnings you do, you don't pay tax. Simple. You take that recognition. So for you to have this, there are 2 important criteria. The previous slide which I was explaining, you have to be recognized as a startup by DPIIT. Second is you need to make another application to them after you get a recognition, which comes from DPIIT circulars. You need to make an application saying that I am eligible for 80IAC now, whichever year you think, out of your first 10 years. So you will get it for consecutive 3 years. So you have to plan which years you will apply. Let's say if I apply in first year, but I only have expenses, I only have losses, there is no question of 80IAC. But subsequent years, I may have gains, I may have profits. So we have to look at that criteria and then apply. Another important point is, this is eligible only for private limited and LLP. Earlier slide we were discussing partnership firm also can be a startup. But 80IAC, no startup business for 80IAC. Okay, that's the second important criteria. Of course, startup should be incorporated after 1st April 2016. These are 3 important criteria. But all I'm saying is 80IAC tax holiday, you need to make another application to DPIIT subsequently, which also generally is accepted. It's not that we've not seen any resistance till now from government in terms of 80IAC. And you have to have profits. If there is no profits, if you are taking that, then it's a loss situation for you even in 80IAC. Okay? The second important exemption is section 56. We all have this concept called angel tax in a common language. This is a section called 5627B of income tax. Now as per 5627B, if you are issuing shares at premium, let's say 10 rupees is the face value, I am issuing shares at 15. Government only says back up that 15 by a valuation report. Justify your valuation. Why is it 15? If it was only 10, let's say if the valuation reports tell it's 12, for example, in my example, then that extra 3 rupees, why did you get? Your company is not asking for any valuation. You issued shares at more than the regular value. So that 3 rupees you pay me tax. Okay, so that is 5627B, that is called angel tax. Now 5627B is a general section which is applicable to all Indian companies. This is not applicable for LLPs or a partnership firm. Okay, now in companies when you are issuing these shares, so one is it is applicable only to companies. Second is if you are issuing shares to non-residents, this is not applicable because FEMA regulations tell that you need to minimum issue it at fair value. So if my fair value is 12 and if I am getting 15 from overseas entities, government says no problem, I am happy because I am getting more dollars into India. So to that extent they are happy, no tax. So 5627B excludes foreign investments. The other thing that is also excluded is venture capital funds, which are now categorized under AIF. AIF category 1. AIF is alternate investment funds. In that, venture capital funds, if you are getting money from them, because venture capital funds have a different governing mechanism itself from SEBI, where they are required to do reporting, robust reporting to SEBI as to how the valuations are being determined, etc. So whenever it is a presumption that whenever a venture capital fund is investing in you, they have done something right. So therefore there is no question on valuation. Okay, these 2 things. Now what was happening is, and these sections have come, this amendment has come in very recently, some couple of years or 3 years back. Before this, what was happening is all the startups, for them the valuation is the main game. Correct? Now valuation will have different nuances around that, which we will deal with a little later in our conversation. But whenever they have this, what is happening is all startups, instead of running their business, are paying 30% tax to government first. Now, government also doesn't want to discourage them, but the tax law is worded like that, which is when they told, okay, if you are a startup recognized by DPIIT, and as per DPIIT circular of 2019, 19th Feb 2019, so 19 to 19, what they also say is, these startups have to satisfy certain conditions, that not every startup will get 5627. You are a startup. For this, you don't have to make another application, but you have to satisfy certain conditions and give a self-declaration every year. What are those conditions? Those conditions are you cannot, as a startup, focus on your business. Don't take land. Don't make investments elsewhere. Don't give loan of the money that you got. Broadly, and related points around that. If you violate any of those, then they are saying, "Oh boss, no, this was not right. We did not intend for this." They will remove 5627B exemption retrospectively. Okay. So of course I've spoken too much technical jargon here, but in simple language, 5627B angel tax is not applicable for startup, provided startup complies with some things. If it doesn't comply, was gone. Okay, and the amount up to which you will have angel tax is 25 crores. Okay, the day you cross 25 crores, your exemption is gone. But in that 25 crores, as I was explaining some time back, any amount that you receive from overseas or any amount that you receive from a venture capital fund, it is out of angel tax. As in, it is out of that 25 crores. So principally also it is out of 5627B. So why again burden you by including that and saying 25 crores in total? So with that objective, they removed it from there also. That is angel tax related conversation. So mind you, 2-3 important points. One is you have to justify valuation. If you are a startup, you may not, provided you satisfy the conditions which they are given. And in this, certain category of investors are not counted for those exemptions or investments. That is angel tax related point. Now the third important tax benefit that you get is section 79. Now what section 79 says? Section 79 says, boss, if I incur loss in year 1, let's say the shareholding is 100% divided between 4 people. Okay. Now the moment 2 people change hands, or let's say more than 49% of your shareholding changes, that day your losses are gone. Business losses, other losses are all out. You don't get that benefit. Now what was happening is, startups, in the starting, there is a lot of effort, lot of expenses that get into R&D. And R&D, on one hand, government told, as per accounting standards, if it's only development, you capitalize. So which means everything goes through your P&L and everything goes into your loss statement for income tax. Now if you have all of those, and if there is another, you are saying that okay, no, you've incurred losses, but if a new investor comes in, you lose. Because investors in startups, what happens is you have series of funds, which I will come in a couple of minutes later, but you have all of those. Now the moment shareholding changes beyond 49%, your losses are gone, and this shareholding keeps changing. It's not straightforward fixed. So to which government also recognized, but they came out with a tricky way of sorting this. They told, okay, you are a startup. Till the time the persons in the year in which you incurred losses, let's say these 4 people, till the time they have these 100%, then let's say there are 3 rounds of investors. All investors pumped in money into the company. They have not taken the money out from the company. As in, there was no exit between shareholders, but there was all primary investments. Till the time you are continuing your story of primary investments, no problem, we will give you exemption from 79. But the day you sell anything, which means you have now started to encash your investments, the day you start encashing your investments, section 79 will trigger. So the only change between 79 is, or for 79, the trickiest way of where they've sorted it. Only primary investment, so long as you keep getting primary investment into the company, section 79 will not trigger, even if your shareholding comes to 0.1%. But the day you sell even one single share, you are out of this, you get into regular provisions of 79, which is for more than 49% change, year of loss, year of set off. If more than 49% is different, no losses are. Okay, I will pause here for a bit. Any doubts? Sorry, it went into a little bit of technical jargon, but yeah. Any doubts with respect to these things? Yes, please.
Yeah, just explain the reason or the rationale behind that, the primary promoter being there.
Correct. So 79. What? So the whole idea of a startup is, startups, the main founder or the person who had the idea should at least continue for a long period of time and make it beyond a startup. So long as he is a startup, again, he's not putting in so much effort. So for him, whenever he is, the day he decides to make exits, that is when government told, okay, you are no longer a startup because the main engine of your entire idea is no longer with you. The moment he is not with you, why should I give you that benefit? That's the whole reason for 79 only covering primary investment, not secondary investment. Yes.
Yeah, relating to section 56(2)(7),
Yes.
you mean to say that the valuation need not be justified by the startups if they have DPIID?
So two parts. Okay, valuation for any company falls under three different heads. Companies Act, okay. FEMA mein you have minimum valuation. Companies Act says at that valuation. There is no plus minus in Companies Act. You can have a small bit of variation, but it has to be that. For income tax, it's a maximum gap. Now what 56(2)(7)(b) here is exempting for startup is only income tax. You will still have to have a valuation report and justify it if Companies Act and FEMA requires.
Yeah, for that purpose and for this.
For income tax purpose, you don't need.
No, okay.
You don't need. Don't. That is what they mentioned.
And the venture capitalist funds will not be included in the 25 crores limit.
Correct. They will not be included in 25 crores limit. They are not included for taxing you under 56(2)(7). Angel tax is not applicable when you get the money from them for that link.
No, one issue here, according to Rule 11 UA of the Income Tax Act, there is a book value. For startups, there is no book value. Second thing they observed, many people are getting funds from friends and family at the initial stage. So the issue came to department is, what is the source of this fund? And you remember this issue has came in 2016. So startups went and represented, including VC communities and other people, angel networks. So they came with this 56(2)(7)(b), saying that we'll give a specific exemption. So to avoid what is the valuation, because your father doesn't know what valuation bringing. As a friend, I'm investing 20 lakhs. What is the valuation? You would have put 1 lakh, I would have put 20 lakhs. So they said, okay, startups I need to encourage in India. I'll give an exemption provided you are registered under DPIIT and you also made a specific application under Form 2 under startupindia.gov.in. That form should be approved and you should receive a mail. So that means CBDT also will get that mail. So they will not ask any questions on the valuation from the income tax. If you have not done that, that entire investment which came in and the startup will be added as your profits. And they will ask you to pay the tax. You got it, no? But AIF and other things are SEBI regulated. There is already a regulation on top of it. So for government, they know, okay, this is a regulated fund, they are doing something. But individuals, they don't know what regulation from where the source is coming. That's where the confusion came, this particular issue has come in.
So separate application of under Form 2 has to be made, but even for 56.
Yeah, and for chartered accountants, the biggest problem we have today is every company, even a small company, is also treated as a startup. And they are bringing funds. Now this new trend has come because of the media. So we have to look into this aspect and we are telling Baba, please understand. It is not for everything. We need to get registered. We need to do all these activities and get it done. Then only we can. Otherwise, I think in 2016-17 we have seen more than 3,500 cases only under that section. And few of them, even today, it has not been followed through.
And in fact, sir, just to add, there is another section called 68, 69, etc., which is unexplained credits. They still department is asking you sources of funds. So for a company, if you get funds, the source of source is to be explained by the company. That they have not given any exemption for. They have only given exemption from taxing you under 56(2)(7). Source of fund, source of source is still to be explained. And there are a couple of startups who've also got notices for that, asking them to explain the source of source. Even though they are now recognized, they have exemption.
Again, we have more than 100 startups which receive this issue.
Correct. Yes, yes.
So even after giving the source, assessing officer has his own way.
Yes.
He was going back to a lot of things and he raised it.
Correct.
There were almost few cases in CIT and they were surplus.
Yes.
Even like they are
Correct.
So currently again, it is being regulated to.
Correct. Correct.
So
So you
what
got
would be
your
the
answer?
what would be the implications for the investor? Let's say some investor has invested 50-60 lakhs. So before they get recognized, so how will it get processed from their side?
See, investor has no issue. Department asks from where you got the source, investor will have an issue. But for startup who is not making money, they are unnecessarily getting taxed for the money what they received as a capital. Technically, from our side, if it is a capital, it is not an income for us. And he has already spent the income. He is not considering. It is a, as I said, section 68 and 69. He is going and taxing as unexplained credit.
So unless they get registered with DIPP, the valuation would not hold.
Correct. For income tax part.
That's a prerequisite.
DPIIT is must. If you feel you are getting funds as a chartered accountant, we are insisting, please get it registered on DPIIT and file for Form 2. That Form 2 should be approved and they should receive a mail. They should keep it in a copy. After that, any transaction happening, we are not bothered.
And valuation. And valuation.
Because you file with ROC. Again, as I said, Companies
Act, you will still need a valuation.
They are saying you need to have the valuation from the registered valuer.
Registered.
Correct.
And you need to put their UDIN number and other things to file it with ROC.
Correct. So all these are protections.
These
So-
are the protections.
So ma'am, income tax asks you to get a valuation from us, SEBI category 1 merchant bank. While Companies Act gives you a flexibility to also obtain it at registered value. Actually, technically, they ask you only from a registered value as per
No,
Companies Act.
registered valuer is by IBPI registered.
IBPI registered, yes. So they have exams where they
Yeah, yeah.
register and then they get the certificate of registered. If you have that, then under Companies Act you can file a valuation. But for income tax, you still need a merchant banker valuation, especially for this section alone.
So you need both values.
If so, as a startup, I don't need merchant banker valuation. I only need registered valuer valuation from a company.
If you don't have that recognition, then you have to get the merchant banker valuation.
See, you can get registered valuer or yeah, of course. If you are not a startup as per DPIIT, then this conversation is any which is it goes into the regular provisions. Regular provisions ask you for a merchant banker.
Even if you get merchant banker valuation, assessing officer will say section 11 UA is not matching, I wanted as a differential tax. He is troubling us. Now under faceless, we need to see how they see.
No, sir. In fact, under faceless, this difference is increasing further because you are not able to explain the same thing in writing as much as you can while you are explaining.
After listening both of you, I see no one is going to go through this one to get the exemption. Did you do any successful
No, there are a lot of.
Can you quote that one? How they have done? What is the best success? In your clients, without quoting their name, can you give me an example how they did in the best possible way? Because after explaining so much, there is no one who could.
No, that's the reason we are saying, if you set up a startup under private limited company or an LLP, go and file your company under DPIIT for recognizing the startup. You get a DPIIT number. After getting DPIIT number, there is a Form 2 which is again available online. You will file it. That will be approved by CBDT, Central Board of Direct Taxes, and you will get confirmation. If that is done, we are done.
There is
This
nothing
stops.
after that.
There is no issue at all. Previously it was not there. They created all this. I think Rahul Gandhi has some company. They brought in money. They put him under Supreme Court. When he released exemption, suddenly government realized that case is also gone. Again they repealed the act, they brought this thing actually.
Sir, but what about the valuation? Because I don't think India allows safe, like what YC uses in terms of valuation, convertible equity. Because at the initial level, when the valuation is not fixed, we kind of give a convertible note to the investor, right? And the valuation which you're talking about in terms of merchant banker registered valuer, it would not pick up the value which is agreed between.
Not at the time of issue of that convertible note, but at the time of conversion, you still need this. This provisions will still kick in. So the day it is getting converted into any shape,
Yeah.
you have this.
And these guys are not okay. Once again, the valuation aspects.
You will have. So if not today, tomorrow. Conversion only defers your requirement for a 5627B testing, but it doesn't evade you from that.
So there is no point about method of valuation, like book value or some other value.
No, so 5627B says DCF merchant banker category.
Both.
DCF is discounted
DCF is a
methodology.
No, I'm saying, can the merchant banker do something else than DCF? That's what I'm saying.
He can, but 5627B will not recognize that.
Because we don't.
Like for
normally
example,
go-
you have PE multiples, EBITDA multiples, revenue multiples. You have all those valuations. When it comes to 5627B, Income Tax Act only recognizes merchant banker giving a DCF. That's all.
Because for early stage startups with pre-revenue, before revenue, it's very difficult to get that.
But you will have projections.
DCF is always on.
DCF is always there. In fact, you will not be able to get EBITDA multiples for a startup because you don't even know how much they will scale. So only DCF works. Book value is a no for this, because book value in 90% of the startups for initial stages will be negative,
Yes.
or will be exactly face value.
So how about they invest as a loan after the share capital? They can invest loan money.
You can take loans. You will have to take loans, but that loans will have to comply with Companies Act.
Yeah.
It should not be a deposit. If it is deposit, then you follow deposit rules, etc. So for startups, there is no exemption under Companies Act. So Companies Act, if you are eligible to take a loan from eligible investors, take it.
Yes, I mean to say if the valuation doesn't support the market value,
Yes.
then we can take it as a loan.
You can take it as a loan, but the day you convert,
Yeah.
that day you will again have to check for valuation. If let's say you are taking a loan, convertible note or convertible. Non-convertible, you anyway choose payback. Then they are not investing in equity.
Yes.
There is no equity risk that person is taking. It's a simple loan, NBFC loan or whatever.
Okay.
He gives you money, you give him interest, finish. But startups don't go into a debt trap, which I will explain a little bit in the next slide. Yes, you had. Exemption for? Foreign investors, yes. So that exemption is for everyone. It is not just for startups. What for startups, that 25 crores criteria excludes this. That's the exemption. For others, you can take any amount of foreign investment. That is not no valuation.
An Indian resident, I mean like non-resident is what the term you use. So non-resident as per tax laws you use it.
Non-resident as per tax.
Not about citizenship.
No. An Indian citizen overseas can be a non-resident. A foreign citizen in India can be a resident.
Yeah, go on.
Okay. Okay. So last slide we were discussing about tax related. Now in a startup, one more thing that you will see very common is employee stock options, because you will have a lot of employees in the starting, and you know for a fact that you may not be able to give them money for the effort that they are doing, but you will be more than happy to give them a percentage of ownership so that they also get that ownership stake in place. So ESOPs is also a very common trend across in startups, and ESOPs, there are different routes by which you can give them ESOP. That is, you have a direct ESOP. Let's say I give it to employee X, I give it to employee Y. That is one route. The second is I will create a trust where all of it is held, and whenever, depending on whoever qualifies, because ESOPs will come with something called as a vesting period, for which you have to put in the effort to be eligible for it. Then you have exercise period when you can exercise it, etc. So all of these also have there is a good recognition that okay, ESOPs are also coming up and people need ESOPs for them to be motivated in startups, because today in startup you don't know whether it will qualify, not qualify, pass, fail, nothing. So which is why you have a common trend of ESOPs also following up in startups. And as per Companies Act, okay, this is the only major exemption as per Companies Act for startups. You can give ESOPs to promoter employees. Now typically in a regular situation, giving ESOPs to promoter employees is not generally permitted. But in this, for a startup which is recognized by DPIIT, you can give them you can give ESOPs to promoter employees, and also you can issue shares to directors or their relatives even if they are holding more than 10%. Otherwise, generally if it is more than 10%, then what is the question of ESOP? Because you already have a good stake in the company. You can still issue them ESOPs as per startup, for a startup. Okay. Now, the tax implication of ESOP is basically whatever you give them whenever they exercise. Okay. Now, of course, the way it impacts your accounting is it will impact over the period of vesting. But whatever you will give them at the time of exercise, whatever is the fair value, that is taxed in their hands as perquisite, salary income. So it is taxed as a perk, and depending on their respective slab rate, they will pay tax. It's in the form of a TDS that it happens, but yeah, that's the tax implication broadly on ESOPs.
Instead of issuing ESOPs, if I issue sweat equity,
The implication is the same.
implication is the same.
Yes. Whether I call it ESOP or sweat equity is more towards technical. The way sweat equity is given is more for technical expertise, etc. that someone is bringing in. Okay. Conceptually, both will follow the same path.
Is there any exemption
No exemption.
So to pay the tax, they have to sell part of the share.
So typically it's in the form of TDS. Now that's an arrangement with the company, whether they will sell, not sell, or they sell and pay the tax, whatever it is.
Because I guess tax will be very.
Generally, company grosses up their salary to include tax and then pay tax. So let's say if you are going to get an ESOP, which value the tax of purpose it is 100 rupees, and let's say tax on that is say 30 rupees. Company will show 130 as your income, 100 as regular, and 30 as cash income. Now that 30 they will withhold and they will deposit it with the company.
Let us take the questions all at the end. So
Yeah, sure. We'll take it at the end.
we'll have time for it. Please be on.
I think you missed a question in the previous slide. The last one, can ESOP be issued to Indian advisors?
Can ESOP be issued to Indian advisors? Currently, as the law stands, it's ambiguous. There's no legal correct or wrong answer.
No ambiguous. You cannot give.
No, we cannot. Correct. I'm coming to that. You cannot give them as ESOPs, as we technically call it. It's not a vesting period that they have. It's not a exercise. But definitely to consultants, you can give it as shares for a consideration. So their services are valued, and to that extent, you will issue them shares instead of giving them cash.
TDS provisions, sir? Simply, for example, you and I are servicing a company. We both are eligible for 1 lakh each.
Correct.
So after deducting 10,000 TDS, we
Correct.
need to follow a
And including GST.
GST, okay. GST we need to get reimbursement. We cannot. So 90,000 is payable. Whatever the value of 90,000, fair market value, again the fair market value coming to play. To that extent, shares can be issued. But today, what is really happening is they say, so 1% of the company shares, I will give it as an advisory share to them. So the 1% of the advisory share at fair market value, they need to issue it to me. And we need to take care of the TDS and other parts. They need to pay the TDS back to the company because they are getting that money, or reduce that consideration and take the balance. Something need to be done on that. It's very tricky from income tax, though it looks very easy.
Correct. And so technically the reason this question is here is, in US you can do this.
Yeah.
In India you can't. Simple answer. In India it will be more like a agreement. It's not an ESOP. In US you have stock options which you can also give to your advisors and consultants. Next. So okay, funding. Why does a startup need funding? It can be different reasons. We've just tried to enumerate few reasons, like there's a prototype creation, a product development. You need to pay salaries of different technical people who are on board, non-technical people who are on board, working capital for certain licenses, for let's say other functions, which is more like finance, admin, HR, etc. So you have different requirements why startup needs funds. Majorly focused on their business is why they need funds, and for them to expand. And as I was saying, if I can reach 10 years to a particular target, if I can hit that in 3 years with a particular fund or a capacity, more like a general, I will want to take that. Yes. So, as I was talking about funding, typically we've just tried to see how the startup financing cycle works. It's called finance life cycle also in very general terms. You start off with self, friends, relatives and funding. As sir was mentioning, your initial investment is generally from friends, families. Valuation is a devil in the detail, but yeah, you get it from friends, families, etc. Now after that, typically startups don't want to take up interest burden because they don't know where the funding goes, etc. Because let's say if I take up loan from a bank or an NBFC or loan from anyone else, as we were discussing, loan always comes with an interest obligation. There is a repayment and interest obligation. So I don't know when I will repay from the company and when I will be able to even pay their interest or I won't be able to pay their interest. We get into something called as a debt trap or a cash trap. Because anytime I earn funds, interest takes it up or repayment takes it up. So which is why generally startups don't take debt funding unless it is very much needed. They go more into equity risk because they are developing something. Now for me to develop something, I need to have a free hand. I cannot be under certain obligations. So that free hand or free handle is given by more equity investment. So you take it from self, friends and families. Then you go into angel funding. Angel funds are basically like angels. In a very literal term, they are angels. They will come, they will guide you, they will help you in terms of money, in terms of their experience, expertise, etc. to grow you further. It's also called seed funding. Angel funding or seed funding is where you grow. So that your seed, basically seed funding comes from an idea that you are a seed and you germinate. So if you water the seed well, it germinates well. So the person who's watering is more like an angel. Of course, I'm trying to be very laymanish, but yeah, angel funding is the next round. After that, typically if you are taking it from banks, it's a different story, but generally banks and financial institutions are avoided. After that, you get into fund related structures where you have venture capital funds coming in. Angel funding is also through venture capital funds, or it can be on a standalone basis. Venture capital funds are more organized. Venture capital funds, alternate investment funds, or private equities are more organized, where they have a pool of funds and then they make an investment. So they are much more. There's a wider breadth of people who are coming in. And after that, of course, ultimately it may be the IPO object. And that's in IPO you get the money from public markets. But that's broadly in terms of your investment life cycle, as to how the startups or even any industry for that matter starts taking funds. So I will pause here. Ma'am, over to you.
8 o'clock.
I have a doubt in the last.
Yes, please.
With regards to the financing, right? When you are taking it from angel funds and seed funding and all, it might be in different forms like a loan or a debentures or something.
Correct. No, so from angel fundings and all, typically even if it is or a loan or debenture, it's generally something that will get converted into equity.
Okay, right. So, do the deposit rules under Companies Act get applicable there?
You will have to see. Yes. If you are a company, you will have to see deposit.
Deposit rules and you have to comply with those.
Yes.
And one more question is like because of the startup and the interest rates they are not able to pay, if they are taking funds from non-resident, then the FEMA rules are there which say that the minimum rate at which they can borrow should not be less than a bank rate. Is there any exemption relating to that also? I couldn't.
No, I don't think there is any.
No, you cannot borrow from NRA.
That's ECB. Yeah.
That it gets into ECB.
You cannot borrow first of all.
No, I think he's saying
we can
ECB
issue
from
debentures to
No,
CCDs you can issue.
yeah.
Compulsorily convertible debentures.
Compulsory convertible debentures.
But that the pricing norms are depending, fair market value. It's not the bank loan. Bank loan and all of that, I mean that rate or whatever, that is applicable for ECB. That becomes a pure borrowing and there are multiple rules relating to that. But what we are dealing with here in terms of the capital is more the FDI. Okay, non-debt basically. Debt rules are different. You had anything to add?
No, I said that if he is thinking of an individual giving a loan to company, it will never happen.
It will not.
Just I want to clarify on that point.
Regarding the debt trap, can we put conditions for interest-free period for the 3 years, interest-free period and repayment also?
Yeah, debt trap for whom you are saying?
So I mean to say, if any company get investment as a loan, okay, for that loan purpose, can we make payment after 3 years or 4 years?
Without interest.
Without interest.
No, generally investments in startup is only in equity, please remember.
Yes.
So today what we are trying to say is, we don't want any loans. If you have loans, you can't see other stages of the funding, please understand. So I was telling one point to madam, why we raise equity is for the growth. Banks will not fund for the growth. Banks will fund term loan for procuring equipment or setting up a factory, or bank will fund for managing your working capital. Beyond that, they don't have any role. For growth today, what is happening? People are just going and putting investment in digital marketing. They are building people to build a software on the technology, correct? Whether banks will fund this kind of scenarios? Never. So that's the reason the fund will come as an equity in the company, but the form is, it can be debentures, it can be a convertible note as we were discussing. That rate will be fixed, but it is compulsorily need to be converted. It will not be repaid, please understand. It will be converted at a certain point of time, which is a fair market value. And as, again, he has not touched the Contract Act, madam will be there. Under Contract Act, if you and I have agreed on certain price mechanism, which will be converted at a certain milestone, we will follow the same thing. You need to meet that milestone, the conversion will happen. So it is compulsorily need to be converted into equity, no more debt. So even if I give as a debt to you with 10% interest, the 10% interest will be cumulatively accrued. For example, you have given 1 lakh, 10% is interest, 1,10,000 will be converted into equity at the predefined fair market value. Understood, no? Right.
Okay. So I'll just step back a little. I'm not sure if this is in this slide or not. But what we are talking from the conversation is, how does a startup raise capital, right? One is the debt form, the other is the equity form. Debt form is more onerous, like as you were hearing. Also because banks are not going to fund without a collateral. Okay, it has to be 3x, 5x, it all depends on the project. Banks don't fund if it is IP. Banks need to look at brick and mortar. If you're setting up a cement company or some other where there is collateral, land, all of that, more opportunities of getting bank finance. But if it is a pure IP related innovation, all of this, the new technologies, whatever that's happening, you're not going to be able to get bank loans, okay, because they need to see that. So, and promoters don't want to get into these guarantees and all the bank requirements that are there. So equity funding is the most popular for startups. But how do you raise equity funding? Either you could get it from the domestic sources, which are Indian residents investing, or you probably heard that there's a lot of FDI coming into India, right, for a direct investment. There, the regulations and the framework is very fixed, in what are the instruments under which you can raise capital into the country. There again, there is a distinction between debt and equity route, okay. So debt again forms under ECB. ECB is external commercial borrowings, and for that, limits are high, very good, whatever, but there are restrictions in terms because they don't want to affect the banks in India. The logic is, if you start raising for 0% or 1%, whatever their interest is outside, it will affect the banks in India. Therefore, it's very regulated, and especially you can't even raise from NRIs and all of that. Loan format is very restricted, okay, and you'll have to get a approval, loan identification number, and the tenure, 3 years, 5 years, only certain segments are there. And even if you were to raise from a shareholder outside India, it has to be through a 25% holder, if they're already a shareholder in the company. So there are multiple restrictions. So ECB is not again a preferred route because you have to service the debt. Okay, so that is not again a preferred route. So what generally startups do and even mature companies do is under the foreign direct investment FDI, non-debt regulations rules. There, the instruments under which you can bring, of course you can bring under equity, but you can generally what comes in is in the form of compulsorily convertible preference shares, CCPS, you would have heard about that, or compulsorily convertible debentures. Okay, the reason it is compulsorily convertible is if it is not convertible, then it then becomes debt. Right? If it's not convertible, that means you're repaying. Right? So they don't want the money to, it's all exchange control, right? Money going out, again it will fall under ECB. So if it is not in any of these instruments, it is categorized as ECB. And all those norms will be applicable. So under FEMA, the preferred route is if it is a debenture format, again it will remain a debenture for a few years, until outer limit. But at some point, whenever next round happens or exits happen, all these debentures will convert into equity or preference shares. That depends on the contract, how you've been able to draft. But default is equity, okay, it will convert into equity. And if it's a CCPS, compulsorily convertible preference shares, they remain preference shares for until Companies Act allows you, around 19 years or 20 years as they think. Until then, they can remain as preference shares, but they still have to convert into equity, okay, at some point. So that is the general preferred route. That's what you would have seen. And convertible notes also, I've heard some question earlier. Under FEMA, Companies Act also, there is if you are a DPIT, registered startup, you are permitted to raise convertible note above 25 lakhs. It's an exemption under the deposit rules, provided you have a startup registration, and if the money is coming from outside India. So non-resident, they're able to raise even convertible notes where the valuation is not fixed. There was a question, right? Initial stages valuation is not clear. That's why people go for these convertible notes. Even safes, right? Safe is very popular format outside India, as you know, Y Combinator and everybody else where the valuation is not clear. They are just putting in the form of safe, which converts into a certain discount. It can be negotiated. It can be converted at a discount or whatever the rate that you agree upon at a later point. Whenever the value, the next financing round happens, the proper round financing happens, then it converts. In India, again, safe directly you can't just import from the US or overseas model because that's not permitted under the Companies Act. Okay, it again takes in the form of CCPS. CCPS is the equivalent of SAFE in India, but I think 100x or whatever they've popularized. It's called iSafe. They're calling it iSafe, but it's the technical and the legal instrument that is permissible in India is the CCPS route. Okay, so it has all the features of a CCPS. Okay, so that's what you would have seen in a iSafe also. Okay, but where legal, I think Nayan and Mr. Ratnakar Garu also, they've covered very well on the finance side, tax and regulatory is the FEMA that we discussed, Companies Act and the FEMA regulations. Legal comes in, you need, any startup requires a proper financial advisor, at the same time a lawyer, for the reason that all of this, the industry practice is to have proper legal agreements when investment is being put in. Okay, you may see companies which don't have proper legal framework and then they get into issues, disputes, with the investors. So it's better to have proper framework on the legal side, and that is where, we start. Lawyers come in when there's a term sheet. All of the commercial terms are drafted and put in the form of a term sheet. That's the framework for how the investment will happen. The term sheet is the stage where due diligence also happens. The process in terms of the investment is term sheet is signed, then investor will carry out a due diligence process on the company, basically to see that all the legal, financial, what they're representing is proper, they have IP protection, the company is properly set up so that there are no issues in the future. So due diligence is carried out. Then a share subscription agreement or a shareholders agreement is generally entered into. Share subscription agreement is for capturing how much money is coming in, when it will come, what are the tranches, will it be milestone based or it will just be one time investment, or will it be spread over 2-3 years, all of those details including the cap table, what is the dilution, all of that is captured in the share subscription agreement. The shareholders agreement we'll go through in detail, there's a slide meant for that. Shareholders agreement is something where all the contractual rights that you are promising to the investor in terms of how the company is going to be run, what kind of voting, what kind of decision making, board seat, quite a few other exit rights, all of that are captured in the shareholders agreement. Okay, those are all fundamental. Now any investment cycle will go through all these legal agreements. You will be familiar and you need to be familiar with those. And the other important area where there is a lot of important focus has to be there is IP. If the company is into innovation, company is into technology, all of that, you need to make sure the intellectual property vests, the value vests in the company. It should not be in the founder's name, because generally what happens, the innovator is the founder, right? They set up a company and they still continue to own the IP in their own name. So we need to make sure that the IP is all transferred, all the value sits at the company level. Okay, so IP assignment agreements also need to be there. And then non-compete and the other agreements are there. Does the next slide cover or shall I just, yeah, okay.
Yeah, this covers it.
Okay, but can you go back there? Yeah, so I'll just go through this. So the investor searches, and then you find an investor and who's going to be investing into your company. Then the valuation, preliminary valuation, all of that is agreed upon. The term sheet is signed. I'm just taking you through the entire cycle of the slide. Execution of the term sheet, and then the due diligence process is carried out. What are the reps and warranties? This is generally what you hear: conditions precedent, conditions subsequent, and other terms. So just to simplify a little bit of legal jargon, but representations and warranties are those, the state of affairs in the company. What is the, what are the assets of the company? What are the liabilities of the company? Okay, what is the intellectual property that the company owns? Okay, and who owns the shares? All the matter of factly, all of the reasons why an investor is looking to put in money into the company, and what the promoters are representing to the investors will fall within the representations and warranties. It's it will set out, are there any tax litigation, is there any kind of basically the issues and the strengths of the company are put in there. So that becomes the foundation for an investor to invest into the company. So if there is any kind of a misstatement, or if there is any kind of misrepresentation, inaccurate information, if you have not provided the financials properly, or there are undisclosed liabilities, some contingent liabilities are there. If you have not disclosed at the time of due diligence, that becomes an issue or a breach scenario where an investor can legally go after the promoters, okay, or the company for that matter. So that's the representations and warranties which are drafted very carefully, and then they go into the proper subscription agreements and the shareholders agreements. Okay, it's just a preliminary thing. And then the and then the conditions precedent and conditions subsequent. What are those? So in the due diligence, what are the various issues? I think there's a slide for that. Can you go to that slide and just explain? Next one. Yeah. So we'll just go through the. So you understand what is legal due diligence, right? You understand what it is. So when a company is set up, not just the registration with the startup registration and all of that, but there are multiple registrations legally necessary, right? GST, okay, and then Shops Act, quite a few labor law registrations are there, and then ESI, professional tax, okay, and then you also have to, if you have 20 above, PF, okay, and then gratuity if you have employees who are completing 5 years, multiple registrations and trade licenses, IEC code, quite a few registrations are necessary. If you don't have any of those, you will be liable. There are penalties and things like that because you start engaging employees. Similarly, you also need to file for trademarks protection or patents protection, copyrights. Depending on your business area, there are multiple legal protections and legal registrations you need to obtain. So the company, so when somebody is conducting a due diligence, especially lawyers, you'll have the law firms look at it. They will have a checklist of all the information that one goes through to see that the company is all properly set up, all the legal requirements are taken care of, and the tax registrations, PAN, TAN, that those are coming along with the incorporation. There is no problem. And if there is any foreign money that is coming in, all the filings with FEMA, right? If you don't file, you don't report the money coming in within the time period, or you don't really file the forms, then repatriation becomes an issue. And if ED and money laundering, all of those issues also come in if you don't report the money. Therefore, it is important that everything is properly taken care of, and especially if you have some key employees, you need to have proper employment agreements. You need to have proper non-competes. You don't want your core team, who's very privy to all the technology or the IP, going and setting up a competing business, right? So these are all what a company at the initial stages also will have to take care of, because if you want to run 3 years, 5 years, you are getting a lot of money, and also you are getting a lot of benefits. You need to have these checks and balances in place. So that is what a legal due diligence will check, and all those, especially if you have, say, commercial property, you've taken a office premises for lease. A lease has to be registered. If you don't register, you can get evicted anytime, right? There's no protection, and it has to be properly stamped. Lease documents, there's a registration. Stamping is necessary. Most of the commercial contracts, also most of the employment agreements and all, also under the Stamp Act, Indian Stamp Act, you need to have minimum stamp duty at least. There's a 200 rupee stamp paper. All of these is very important. If you have to enforce any of these rights in a court of law, without a stamping white paper, you can't enforce that in a court of law. Court will throw it out. They will not even consider that as a admissible evidence. Okay, but these many people are not aware of. They just carry out the business without really properly following the legal requirements. So those are the risks that are analyzed by lawyers, and then there are conditions precedent which are set up, saying that these are all the conditions you close before my money comes in, so that I don't have to worry about any of the legal issues later. And conditions subsequent. If something is very critical, you put that as conditions precedent, so that they're done before the investment comes in. Or if they're okay, you give them 30 days or 45 days time, so that they comply with those requirements. Say, for example, Shops Act. Most companies don't have registration on the Shops Act because they don't know, they're not aware of it. And we are seeing very recently also even very large companies where the multiples, the valuation is in 300 crores, 500 crores that they are looking to sell the company. Once we sent the checklist, they started getting the registration in the Shops Act. We saw that, or they wouldn't have renewed it. These are some basic requirements, but still, because of various reasons, companies are not aware about it. Okay, so those are the various points and the checkpoints that a legal diligence is carried out, and then a report is given to the investors if you are representing the investors, or if you are representing the company, you will try to fix all those issues and then go forward with the proper legal documents. Okay? Yeah. Any questions?
not executing agreements on a stamped paper, does it take away the legality of the paper? Doesn't
It takes away the enforceability.
Enforceability also, like there are a lot of cases where
No.
it has been accepted. Stamped is just a
No.
administrative activity. Actually.
No, I mean you have to go get it regularized. I'm not saying you can't, but you have to pay 10 times the penalty.
Okay.
It's called impounding. There is a procedure to regularize. I'm not saying it becomes void. It doesn't take away the legality, but a court will not even entertain. Okay, because we handle litigation also. I've heard at the high court level, trial court levels also, these matters are not considered by the court also because this is a requirement of the law. Okay, so but there is a procedure. It's time consuming. You need to go to the registrar of stamps and then you need to pay 10 times the penalty. It may be a small amount only. So some companies have taken a decision that we are not going to have these employment agreements on stamp paper. It is okay because the incidence of breaches or whatever is 1%. We'll pay the penalty at that time. Some have done it. But many IT companies are getting all these employment agreements and all on franking or stamp papers on a regular basis because they realize. But sometimes it's kind of intimidating to the employees, right? When they have to sign on and they'll run to the lawyers and they say, when they get scared to sign some bonds, they think. So for that, just a perception issue, and legally it is required. Okay, so those are there. So what are the various issues we generally find is, some of these, but these are of course in some mature companies we see Gratuity Act issues, stamping of the agreements, even customer contracts for that matter, right? Large amounts of revenue is coming from some large customers. Those are all necessary if you have to enforce. It is important it is in a proper stamp paper. And we've also seen that some are not signed, stamped. It's just casually business is carried out. The problem comes in, everything is going well, very well. But if there is a dispute, if you have to recover, if you have to approach the court of law, then you will realize the issue. Then nobody will sign or nobody will cooperate with you. So it is better to have all of this in the first instance itself. Okay, so proper legal advice is necessary. And some of the labor laws, okay, many policies are not maternity benefit. That's a requirement of the law. You have started employing employees and things like that. You need to have certain policies. Now POSH is a big issue. Sexual harassment, prevention of sexual harassment is very important to have proper policies in place. Now you have to file annual report of any incidents with the labor commissioners. All of those requirements are also there. Okay, so but people are not aware of it. So POSH and then maternity leave, all of that, you need to make sure when the diligence happens to ensure that these policies are in place. GST and professional taxes, that is fine. Tax filings, you will see in many, of course, these are startups, investments may not, people may not insist on a 281, but in a larger M&A transactions and things like that, investors do require or buyers do require that you have to go get a certificate from the income tax department that there are no dues. Otherwise, your transaction itself can be set aside. It can be voided. Okay, how much time do I have? So that we can, so this we can use 10 minutes. Maybe you need to go back to the slide on the shareholders and meetings. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So I can just quickly walk through these rights because which are very legal terms, but I think there will be a lot of benefit. If I'm too technical, let me know and any questions I can answer. So the rights typically given to investors are preemptive rights. These are all what go into the shareholders agreements. Okay, so when an investor is coming into the company, it is almost like he's whatever the percentage, so it is very important. These are not like standard, okay. Many people think it's just a template, a shareholders agreement, but a lot of nuances are there within each clause. So depending on what stake the investor is taking, is he coming in at 10% or 26% or 51%, what is the, or 40%, depending on the stake that the company is giving to the investor, these rights are either medium level, higher level, whatever. So a promoter has to take very good care that he is not giving away too much to the investor by virtue of all these rights. And if you are an investor as well, you need to have some proportion in terms of what you are asking. If you are coming in at less than 10%, you can't have control of the board, right? These are all generally very proportionate rights. So that gets negotiated very well, in terms of when the shareholders agreements are being signed. So I'll just explain a little bit. Preemptive right is once they put in the money, if the company is looking to raise another right, another capital infusion, another set of investors coming in and putting in money, then will the earlier investor also have a right to participate, or will he get diluted? That's the issue. So here preemptive right is you need to give him the right first chance to invest into the company. If he does not invest, then you can raise it from outside. So they also get to participate in that. Okay, preemptive. Right of first refusal, that is for infusion of capital. Right of first refusal is if the promoter is selling his stake in the company. So what happens is once an investor puts in money into the company, promoters can't freely go transfer their shares, they can't go sell away the company, because I have come in from an investor side, put in money into the company, because you are the promoter, you are running the company, you need to stay involved at least for a few years, until 5 years or whatever. Generally all those are negotiated and properly drafted into the shareholders agreement, depending on what the exit timelines are. Is it 3 years, 5 years, what is it? So until then there are lock-in periods that are agreed upon. So before that time, if a promoter is looking to sell, even if it is 2% or 5%, usually it is subject to the investor's consent. Okay, so they have to give the consent. But there are also these right of first refusal. What it means is before you sell it out to somebody, you have to get an offer from a third party, offer to the investor first. If the investor refuses, then you go sell to a third party. Okay, so these are all transfer restrictions that are agreed upon in a shareholders agreement. Tag along right. Tag along right is generally for an investor, it's an economic right, not just a shareholder right, but an economic right, where the promoter, if he is selling out the company, then the investor has a tag, he has a right to tag along with the promoter. Even if he is selling whatever the percentage is, proportionately the investor also wants to sell to the same buyer so that they get a right to exit. Okay, I'm just trying to simplify the terms. And drag along. Well, this is at a much higher level. If the investor is holding a larger percentage, 40% or so a significant minority, sometimes they also have right to drag. So there are timelines you agree upon. An exit can be by way of an IPO, or it can be by way of a strategic sale or a buyback, whatever, they're all agreed upon the exit terms. If those are not fulfilled within the time period, then the investor will have a right to drag the promoters and the other shareholders so that the entire company can be sold to whoever the investor chooses to find an exit for the investor, okay, for the money that they are putting in. Put and call options, this is also, you have a right to put your shares for sale to the promoter, or you have a right to call the promoter shares. These are all legal mechanisms built in within the documents so that exits are provided as per the timelines and as per the intent of the parties. Okay. Liquidation preference, this is all interstate, if there are multiple investors. So investor gets a priority to get paid out if the company is sold, and that's called a liquidation preference. In case of any kind of an exit, the priority is for the investor to get paid first before the promoters get paid. Okay, and if there is one investor, that's simple. But if there are multiple investors, who gets a priority? There's like a waterfall, some are superior rights, some are pari passu rights. It all depends on what is the value at which you have invested into the company. If you say invested at 100, somebody who has invested at 1,000 at a later point, he may want to have a higher preference. So all this gets negotiated, liquidation preference. The very important clause to keep in mind in case of any shareholder agreements. And then affirmative rights, reserved matters. This is where the decision making of the investors comes in. There are reserved matters that are agreed upon, where for all the critical, important, large, events relating to the company, say a sell-off or merger, amalgamation, liquidation, any of those things, you need to get the investor consent. You can't just do whatever you want to. And these are all reserved matters which gives visibility to the investor into what are the operations in the company. Okay, you should make sure that they don't get to interfere with every decision making, but large decisions will have to go through the investor consents. Okay, IT dilution rights. This again, this is negotiated, and then what happens is once the investor puts in, they will negotiate clauses that if you raise capital at a later stage also, I should not get diluted. Okay, board seat, depending on the proportion. What is the percentage of stake that they're picking up? Either it could be 1 or 2 board seats. It all depends on the stake that they're getting. Okay. More favorable rights. That if somebody else gets a better right than me, then I also will be eligible to get that. Okay. I'll pause at this stage and any questions I'll take, and then I think we'll be running out of time. So we'll start the panel discussion. Right?
Yeah.
We'll be happy to take any other questions. Or is there any other slide? We've covered this. Huh?
I say.
Yeah, I say and all of that I've covered. Any questions? Huh? Any questions for those who are not able to see?
So if there is no shareholder agreement executed,
Hmm.
so what happens to these rights? Any default thing?
No.
It will be litigated.
If there's no shareholder agreement, the framework itself will be missing. Okay. Of course, Companies Act provisions will be applicable. If you're a preference shareholder, what are your rights under the Companies Act? Those default rights will be there. But additional rights that you would have otherwise been able to negotiate and get good, exits and things like that, those are all not covered by Companies Act, as you know. Okay. So it will be very limited rights. So it is better to have a shareholders agreement in general, even founders agreement for that matter, right? If there is one promoter, that's well and good, but there are 3 or 4 of them, okay? If all friends come together, they set up companies. Things are going very well, they stay together. If things are not going very well, then they may split. So most of the time what we see is, friends would have come together, they would have taken half of them in equal percentage, 33%, 33%, 33%. One of them is active, one of them is passive, they're not playing a role, they're not contributing to the growth of the company. But it becomes very difficult to take the shareholding back. You need to have some proper understanding amongst the founders also, which is very critical. Because some people may lose interest after a year, or they want to exit, they need to go back to their families, they need to fend for them. Startups don't pay them high salaries or whatever. So they're generally, if they're not doing well, then they're ready to leave. Then what happens? Do you buy their shares back, or you just going to leave them with that high percentage? At a later point, they'll just benefit without doing anything. All these issues become very critical. So it's important to have proper framework, shareholders agreement or founders agreement.
So can this be added in the articles of association?
All of this will have to be added in the articles at a stage, because see, generally when the company is set up, it's all the default articles. If you have 2 innovative articles, you won't get approval from the ROC also. So it's generally they're set up by default. But all of these shareholder rights to become enforceable under law, you need to have that part of the articles. Articles get amended. Otherwise, it's not enforceable in a court of law. Courts have held that it is not binding on the company. So it becomes difficult. Yes.
So is it advisable to have an alternative dispute resolution mechanism in the articles, so that going to the courts normally it takes time and so could you elaborate on that?
Right. So generally shareholders agreements, you also see that dispute resolution courts take a long time, right? Anything getting stuck with the court. Also, some of the courts are not even equipped to deal with these commercial disputes. Okay, now there's a commercial court, and at least, but the same judges are listening even in the commercial court. They have not really taken from somewhere else. Okay, so arbitration is built in. Arbitration mechanism is built in generally in the shareholders agreements and subscription agreements. Because you can probably nominate or get as an arbitrator somebody who is familiar with these kind of issues. Okay, instead of running to the court. But arbitration has its own, timelines. Now it's at least within 1 year, an arbitration has to be finished with all the new amendments that have come about. But still, it can end up in a court. Arbitration is not final, as you know. It can get challenged in a court of law, but only on specific grounds. Okay, so at least the grounds are limited. It's not a matter of appeal as a matter of right. Okay, so there are certain grounds only on which you can go to the court. So at least that alternate dispute resolution mechanism, you can have mediation, you can have conciliation as the initial dispute resolution. If that doesn't work out, arbitration, and if that also doesn't work out, then court. Okay, so those are all we need to build it within the documents. It can also become part of the articles. Okay, so we'll start with any questions? Otherwise, we can take it.
One last question.
Yes.
In any startup, in the stage of 0 to 1, so I would say 120 things to manage.
Correct.
And this is the last thing which any startup founder would think about.
Correct.
And we don't have the bandwidth, whether it's the mental bandwidth or the monetary bandwidth.
Correct.
And most importantly, all of this are protection to the investor. This has got nothing to do for the company's well-being.
Even company basic registrations and all, how will you carry on business without the legal registration?
No, these are additional, because if I give my own example, I have a commitment of $1 lakh from 3 different countries. But all of this, it will take at least 3 to 4 months. Even the DIB registration takes a lot of time. So what would you recommend practically? Because this is not, listening to this is suffocating itself.
Correct. It's legal requirements. Most startups don't do that.
Yes.
Okay, which is expected, because where do they put the money? In building a business rather than being legally compliant.
True.
But where they face the challenge is when they're looking for an investor. If you are okay, you are self-funded, You carry on without much of a legal protection until whenever you want to. But the minute you want to raise capital, any third party coming in, your house needs to be in order, right? If you are not properly compliant, a third party will not come in, put in money into the company. Then what happens is, to fix all of this will become 6 months effort. Funding will get postponed. That's what we are seeing. The practical issue is, like Nayan said, when do you apply for your tax exemptions? When you are ready for profits or whatever, right? Similarly, when you are ready to raise investment, you need to plan ahead, have somebody to help you out with getting everything in order, so that you don't waste time. Any investor putting in money, even if it's $10, they will need everything to be proper. Otherwise, they can lose the money.
If my angel is okay with this,
Angel will not be okay. But if the angel is benevolent, very good. They can come.
then we can not think about this.
Yes, but in general, people are aware now. The industry is much more mature. People know that they need to ask for certain things before they put in money, because they don't want to risk the money. That's what it is. Yeah.
From a promoter's perspective, assuming that I'm a promoter of a company and I have commitment from say 3 or 4 investors, and they have invested partly, and that for whatever reason they are not doing it, do you suggest that appropriate terms and conditions and clauses be incorporated in my investment agreements as we have carried on that, so that in the event for whatever reason, like there are differences between us or disputes, as a promoter, I have right to say that okay, we have issues. Here is the notice, and then I do a fair valuation, giving the exit, so that my company is not affected.
Correct. So you agree on a mechanism to purchase the shares within the document itself. It's a founders agreement. So if you've spent say 1 year, so that's why it's better to have vesting periods. Okay. So even if it is 33% or 50% you have agreed upon, you let it vest over a period of 4 years. So that means that you've stayed for 4 years, contributed 5 years in the company, you are entitled to get that shares. If you've stayed only for 1 year, you should not be entitled to get all the 50% in the instance itself. So that is one, vesting is one. The other one is having a fair value determination, so that if you are looking to exit, let us come up with this. Or if you don't even stay for 1 year, you are leaving within 6 months, then there is a penalty also. Even whatever shares were vested, I'll buy at a face value. Instead of even a fair market. Why should I give you a fair value? So all of these can be agreed upon in the documents itself. Exit mechanism. Okay.
So we'll take a short break, and after that we'll be having a fantastic panel discussion. So we'll assemble in 15 minutes.